Welcome back to another Gaming Memories video, and here we're actually going to be playing Need for Speed 2. It's actually a sequel to the original Need for Speed. I've actually done a previous video on this. If you haven't seen it already, I'll leave a link in the description so that you can go and check it out. And this here predominantly came out in 1997, about a year after the original game was released on the PlayStation. Now I remember going back to when I seen this. Now again, like I mentioned in the previous video, the first Need for Speed game I'd ever played really in the series was Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit. I hadn't actually played the likes of Need for Speed 2 or the first game until later on, and there were really big differences compared between the first one and the third one, and this one was kind of stuck in between. I remember now reading actually a load of magazine articles and reviews when this game initially came out, and it came out in around the summer of '97, and it actually came out to kind of lukewarm kind of reviews. In some cases it didn't get great reviews, and I remember actually reading the articles, and like the pictures of it for me at the time looked actually decent, but then I suppose at the same time it's not until you actually play a game that you realise what it's like. Now after playing it myself, you can see why it didn't get as good a reviews as say the first game in the series or even later games in the series, due to a few different factors. Like the gameplay is fine and it is actually okay for what it is. Like at the end of the day it's a racing game. Like I always try to see the good in games, even if they're not as good as some other games that may be out there, because every game, in my opinion, especially when it comes to the PlayStation, is unique. They all have something unique to kind of offer, and this here in a lot of respects is no exception, because even though it was a very different title from the original title, as I mentioned, and it did play a little bit differently, it didn't feel as fluent or as free-flowing as the original game. In terms of the graphics, I'll be honest, in my opinion, from looking at it, the graphics do seem a bit choppy, and the frame rate seems to have dropped a little compared to the first game. The graphics in the first game were definitely a bit more bright and vibrant, and the game as a whole just felt more fluent. The frame rate seemed to just work well with the original game, even regardless of the speed of the cars when you were driving them, and everything just seemed to work a lot better as well, even down to the handling physics of the cars. I found that the cars just seemed to handle a wee bit better, whereas this one here, it just definitely seemed a little bit more twitchy. Now obviously with a sequel they're obviously going to be trying to experiment with things, but one of the biggest gripes I actually had about this game was in terms of, because of the handling physics, the track layouts and designs in the game didn't really suit the handling physics of the cars in this game to an extent, because obviously you'd be travelling at such speeds, and then you would end up having really sharp hairpins and bends, and sometimes the handling of the cars, even at low speeds, it felt like you were driving kind of like a tank, and it was very very hard to actually manoeuvre the cars in any specific direction, especially when you're going around a tight hairpin, for instance. As you can see, just looking at one of the tracks I'm actually about to pick now, you can see like on the map what it's actually like, and it kind of demonstrates as you're driving through it as well. Like some of the designs even of the levels themselves, some of the obstacles kind of make it quite difficult, even as much so to actually be able to actually manoeuvre the cars around. And I find sometimes on these type of older games there was usually that type of a quirk in it where they did make it very difficult, and you'd be wondering to yourself what were they actually thinking when they were designing it, because again, like I said, the mechanics of the game doesn't really suit the style of the environment that it's in. But that's not to say it's necessarily a bad thing. It's obviously a thing that had its own unique quirkiness for the time, but it's something that definitely could have been improved on. Now it was improved on a lot in the later games in the series, so it was even down to the handling and the dynamics, but compared to the first game, and even it was mentioned in magazines like why they got it so wrong with the sequel. Instead, the sequels are usually meant to be better, but it felt totally different compared to the original game. Now in saying that, I'm not totally dissing on the game and saying that it's totally negative. It's actually not. It's actually, you can play it, and it's not an overly bad game. It just wouldn't be the best in the series. It's probably the weakest link, in my opinion, in the series, and a lot of people would probably agree with me on that as well, because it wouldn't be as easy to pick up and play compared to a lot of the other games in the series. Like you can see there, like in terms of a lot of the corners and that, sometimes the handling of the car doesn't reflect the layout of the tracks and so forth, etc. So you can get caught out very, very easily. But on a positive note, apart from those minor gripes, like the game itself, apart from the graphics and so forth, and obviously the track layouts, you had a really good selection of cars, like really highly exotic cars for the time, that were highly desirable back in those days. So that was pretty cool. And again, even though with this sequel it did pave the way for a lot of games to kind of use those elements as well, with the likes of licensed cars and so forth, so it definitely had its plus points. Plus the music soundtrack in this game was actually quite good as well. There was some actually really catchy tracks in this game as well. They kind of did suit the style of the game at the time, so it wasn't all like a bad experience. It just compared to the first game, when you seen how good it actually was for the time, this was definitely, in a way, in some ways it was a step in the right direction, but in other ways it took a back seat in terms of certain elements, as I mentioned. But again, it's like everything else. There's always unique elements to all these type of games. They always had something in them that really kind of stood out. But when you compare them to other games, like on the platform or even within the Need for Speed series itself, it does have a lot, leave you with a lot of questions, and it does have a lot of things to be answered for. But apart from that, it's not to say that it's necessarily a bad game. Like, to be honest, I have played a lot worse racing games on other consoles and platforms over the years. To be honest, even recent games, even on modern platforms, I've played actually some terrible games on platforms that you're actually wondering, like, how is this even possible? How can people even develop this type of junk, basically? So this here is actually a pleasure to play compared to some of those games, if I'll be totally honest. So it's not to say that it's disrespectful to it at all. It's not to say that it's a bad game. It's just I can definitely see where a lot of people really didn't see the aspects of some of the features in the game as well, compared especially to the first one, because the first one left a lot to really be left desirable. So you could only imagine that when a sequel actually came out, that it was actually going to be, in some ways, you know, you'd expect it to be better. But, and saying that, with Need for Speed 3, I will be doing another video on this actually soon. They actually did perfect it, and they did actually get it right. And obviously that paved the way then for future games to actually just go from there as well. So it's definitely a lot to be said that they learned from this game and then improved as future games in the series went on. But in saying that, like, you can pick up and play like the original game. You can have a bit of fun with it. The only thing is you will find it very, very hard to win a race. That's the one thing I will say. But if you're willing to stick with it, you can definitely play it casually and have a bit of fun with it all the same. And again, like with the PlayStation, the one thing I will say is the PS1 had no shortage of racing games. Like, there was any amount of racing games, like from both okay to exceptional. You had really kind of that choice, and it was totally up to the individual themselves as they were playing it. Now, me personally, I was always willing to give every game a go. Now, I will admit, the likes of this here, I'd only played this more in recent times compared to the years gone by. And there is a big difference compared to, like, say, games I have played like recently, and say the likes of with this here. But that's not to say that it's anything bad about it, because like I always mention, like, every game in its own right, especially for me on the PlayStation, it offers something unique, and it does leave a lasting impression of you, regardless of whether you think it's good or bad. It does leave some sort of impression for you. So it's totally how you see it, you know, what you want to make of it at the end of the day. But again, this all adds to the nostalgia. It doesn't matter whether people would think this is a bad game or not. It is a game in its own right. And you do have to hand credit to the people that actually put the time and effort into creating these games. Again, like everything else, it's like when you're learning anything new, it's always a learning process. You know, you may not get it right every time, but that's not to say that you won't make that mistake again the second time. So, like with this here, it's still not a bad game. Like I mentioned, there has been worse games out there, so it's definitely something to have a look into. But you know what, even for the likes of this here, if you do want to play through these games and you want to know more about the Need for Speed franchise, definitely give this a go as well, and then you can see the comparisons between them all. So what are your experiences of this game? Have you played this or any of the Need for Speeds in the franchise? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. If you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like. Also hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to be updated of future videos, as I will be releasing more videos in this series. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.